Guys, welcome to my new video, and this is going to be a scuffed last minute Resto Shaman guide. So if you're watching this, guys, there's going to be an updated video that's going to be more in-depth in about a month or so when the gearing and maybe class change is going to settle down a bit. So keep that in mind. This video is going to be looking at mainly things like Covenant choices, Soulbinds, Legendary combos, talent builds, and mainly the actual gameplay of Resto Shaman both in Raids and Mythic Plus. So let's go and get started. So in terms of new spells the Resto Shaman received, they got a whole bunch of new spells that a lot of them you might never use, things like Primal Strike. But in terms of abilities that actually might be impactful, Water Shield is here, something that you want to maintain on yourself all the time. Relatively not super interactive in terms of our fun, but if you don't have it, make sure you have a weak or something to tell you that, hey, I need to activate it, and it's gonna improve your mana management. In terms of other abilities, you'll notice that you get Mana Tide Totem, so this is going to interact really well with certain legendaries that we will talk about later on. More utility to a class that already provides utility, really cool. In raid situations, you most likely will have to tell other members when you're using this because the range can be relatively small depending, but generally speaking, really cool. And besides that, Earth Shield. And this is one of the things that makes Resto Shaman, or at least fills in their weaknesses in terms of single target healing. Earth Shield right now increases the healing on that target by 20%. And that is pretty strong. So let's go to the talents. And this is going to be a quick overview. I'm going to start off with our actually Mythic Plus talents first of all. So this is something that I'm using. And honestly, tier 15, Torrents has been, to some extent, Riptide has been buffed a lot. But Torrent talent has been nerfed and never was really viable or optimal in any situation. So you most likely will never use this. Undulation, again, I've been using this in Mythic Plus situations to add additional single target healing, especially if I'm using more healing surges or healing waves, which is very popular in Mythic Plus content. If I am running Chains of Devastation Legend, it gives me instant chain heal and instant chain lightning, and if I'm using on a lower end key, a lot of my healing is going to be chain heals, so I might be using something like Unleash Life. It really depends the legendary combo and what content you're doing, honestly. I think both of these are going to be perfectly viable. Echo of Elements is something that I use all the time because I do enjoy the fact that I'm going to have 2 Lava Bursts. You're gonna have 2 Riptides. You have to keep in mind the way the charges work in World of Warcraft. It's not exactly as good as you might think, because even though you have 0 charges of something, only one of those charges is going to be coming back off cooldown at that given time. So, but still, Echoes is still a very good choice. I feel Deluge could be a decent choice in Mythic Plus if you need more healing and if you can micromanage your Riptides better. Generally speaking, I think these are going to be interesting. I prefer to go with Echoes a lot of the times, but it really depends. In tier 30, honestly, Static Charge or Spirit Wolf, situational completely. Static Charge is going to be nice for your Capacitor Totem. Spirit Wolf might give you an additional, or you could build an additional cooldown or personal cooldown, but it requires a lot of idle time to some extent. Tier 35, Ancestral Vigor is becoming far better in Mythic Plus because a lot of the affixes are no longer scaled on max HP and they're scaled on the key level. So all of a sudden, increasing players' HP is going to be far more valuable. And that's something that's really nice in Mythic Plus environment. Earthen Wall Totem is going to show up on healing meters, which again, people in raid situations might care about that more than anything else. APT Totem, there's going to be very interesting interaction with this, specifically with a Necrolord Soulbinds, and I'll talk about that. Tier 45, somewhat situational. I like to go with Graceful Spirit because one of the biggest issues with Resto Shaman is healing on the move, and Spirit Walker's Grace. If you miss time Spirit Walker's Grace, it can be it can hurt you a lot. But if you are running with Chains of Devastation, you can heal on the move as long as there's going to be a target that you can use your Chain Lightning on. So you could maybe go more defensive route, depending. Tier 45, honestly, I always go with Cloudburst. The fact that I don't like Flash Floods because of how it interacts with global cooldown, I always prefer Cloudburst in a lot of situations here. And honestly, it's one of my favorite abilities, and we'll talk about this a bit more. In tier 50, I feel in Mythic Plus it's going to be Ascendance all the way when you have to deal with Prideful, because Prideful is going to require a lot of AoE burst healing. Ascendance does have a relatively short range, but in Mythic Plus situations, Prideful, everyone's grouped up. It's a 3-minute cooldown that provides a lot of healing, and it's all about Prideful healing requirements at high keys. At the same time, I feel that High Tide can also be very nice, especially when you're doing or combining it with your legendary Chains of Devastation. Honestly, the talents I'm going to be running in raids are going to be Unleash Life, because I feel Unleash Life is something that you're always going to be running, are very flexible in raid environments. Echoes again is a very strong choice, again situational. In terms of raids, Earthen Wall Totem is going to show up on healing meters if you really care about that. You can make use of, honestly, again, Ancestral Protection Totem could be very strong in certain boss fights, but I think people are still trying to discover if it's going to be very powerful. Think of Mythic Jaina, very cool. In terms of tier 40, again, I always go with Graceful Spirit, but you're probably going to be using Windrush Totem because you want to help out the raid members. Tier 45, always Cloud Burst. I always enjoy Cloud Burst in raid environments. I think it's what makes Resto Shaman. In tier 50, honestly, this is the role that's going to be the most impactful and most fun because you're probably going to be changing this talent based on every single boss. I think the default choice might be High Tide or Wellsprings. I haven't really decided. High Tide, again, it has been nerfed, the talent itself. Now every 20,000 mana you spend brings a High Tide, making your next 2 Chain Heals heal for an additional 10%. Used to be 20%, and then Chain Heal got nerfed a couple of times. And Wellspring got buff, and Ascendance kind of got buff as well. So all of a sudden, if people are stacked, a lot of AoE damage, High Tide. If people are spread and you're not sure if you can reach them through Chain Heal or if you can reach them through Healing Rain and things like that, Wellsprings. And Ascendance, hey, this boss every 3 minutes is a huge burst. I think I could make Ascendance work here. So guys, you're gonna have to use your brains on this one in terms of what to use when the Castle Naturally is going to be released. So let's get back to Change of Devastation Legendary, and it feels really good. So I need to showcase it. So if you cast Chain Lightning, you're gonna have a 20-second buff where you can cast instant Chain Heal. Chain Lightning, Chain Heal. Chain Lightning, Chain Heal. And honestly, in a lot of situations in Mythic Plus, this might not be the best way to go because you're only maybe hitting one mob. Or maybe there's only one person taking damage. So you might not actually want to use this combo all the times, but because you have this 20-second cooldown, all of a sudden you have an option of, hey, I'm just gonna keep this buff rolling. I'm just gonna make sure I have this buff available. Specifically, you have this instant Chain Heal available. And playing around this is really fun. And on top of that, look what happens. As long as I have a target, I can do healing on the move. And I'm not that reliant on Spirit Walker's Grace, and I'm not really that reliant on talents like Graceful Spirit. So this legendary has multiple positive things, but sometimes it is not the best way to go. There are certain legendaries that are going to make your mana tide, or you're gonna get an additional cooldown. So mana tide in Mythic Plus situations, honestly, who cares about mana? Because you'll see, Prideful, mana is, there's going to be a lot of mana. So you can combine Spirit Walker's Tidal Leg Guards. After using Mana Tide Totem, the casting time of Healing Wave and Chain Heal is reduced by 50%, and the mana cost of your Chain Heal and Healing Wave is reduced by 25% for 10 seconds. This all of a sudden gives you an additional cooldown. So just look at this in terms of how many throughput cooldowns you can have. So if you run Ascendance in Mythic Plus scenarios, you might be running something along the lines of this build. You're gonna have Ascendance, you're gonna have Healing Tide, even though Healing Tide in Mythic Plus or low groups, you're gonna have Spirit Link Totem, and you're gonna have Mana Tide, which is actually gonna give you throughput besides the mana increase as well. So how can you not deal with high Prideful when you have this much cooldowns to play with? This is why Resto Shaman is so strong. In raid situations, I feel that legendary is gonna make you use your Mana Tide when you don't want to, because you might be like, oh hey, I really need throughput, but everyone else is like, hey, I'm full mana or I don't need it. So I do feel it's going to be more awkward. So this brings us to one of the best legendaries that a lot of people are going to be using in raid situations and possibly Mythic Plus because they have no other choice, and that's going to be Primal Tide Core. If you're raiding, this is going to be your best legendary. Every forecast of Riptide also applies Riptide to another target. When we're talking in terms of pure HPS, Riptide has been buffed. This legendary has direct synergy with certain Covenant abilities, which we'll talk about very soon. This is going to give you a lot of throughput in raid situations, and because if you're focusing on raids like myself, I'm going to be making this first, so I'm going to be using this in Mythic Plus. It's going to be perfectly fine in Mythic Plus as well. It's going to provide you a lot of HPS. The only downside, it has nothing to do in terms of damage. So let's go and have a look at the Covenant choices, and this is going to be a big one. There is a lot of, or at least there's 2 Covenant choices that are really popular. You have Necrolord Primordial Wave, which I'm using right now, and I find it really fun. And you also have Venthyr's Chain Harvest, which I feel is really boring, but that's subjective. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of both. First of all, Necrolord Primordial Wave is going to apply a Riptide, and then you're gonna have a certain amount of time when you can cast Healing Wave, and there's going to be splash healing on the people who have Riptide. So the name of the game here is getting as many Riptides as possible. This has direct synergy with things like Primal Tide Core. This has direct synergy with things like Echo of Elements. Keep in mind, like I mentioned at the start of the video, charge system in World of Warcraft is not as good, or it's a lot more complex or annoying than it might seem. So all of a sudden, this Primordial Wave with Legendary, it has a lot of synergy. On top of the fact that, let's imagine these are allies. You're gonna apply Riptide, 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 and they might spread out. They might go all the different directions. And what happens? You can just use Primordial Wave again when you're gonna come off cooldown, and you're gonna use your Healing Wave, and all of these targets are gonna get Healing Wave onto them. All of a sudden you can see what's happening here. You're not limited by distance, by range. Like a lot of your healing abilities, Healing Rain, Chain Heal, they're all limited by it. So it does help you with burst AoE healing that is not reliant on stacked areas or stacked players. So I think that's a big advantage. On top of that, every Covenant ability is gonna go into Cloudburst. So before you're gonna use any of these Covenant abilities, you wanna make sure Cloudburst is rolling, but we'll talk about that in the gameplay section. In terms of Venthyr, you'll notice that Chain Harvest is gonna have a 1.5 minute cooldown that can be reduced based on your crits. Shoot and go away type of deal. It's relatively super simple. There's not a lot of things that you need to do. Maybe you'll try and aim or use it on a target that is the most central, because it's gonna have like a radius around it. But at the end of the day, this is the key of Venthyr is the simplicity. It's very simple to use. Primordial Wave to some extent can have, again, we're not gonna go too much into rotation, but maintaining 6 or 7 Riptides can require certain kind of preparation, maybe 10 or 20 seconds before there's going to be incoming damage. You might start thinking about it. So that's something that there is. Again, there's a high skill ceiling to Primordial Wave. Chain Harvest, on the other hand, use it, adds damage and healing. Again, Primordial Wave in Mythic Plus situations has very little potential in terms of DPS, while Chain Harvest has a lot of potential for DPS, so that's also something in terms of consideration. In terms of Soulbinds for Necrolords, you're gonna go with Emny straight away. Emny, lead by example, is going to be a good boost to you and your allies. On top of the fact that in terms of the conduits that you're gonna want to get, Swirling Currents is going to be something that's going to be universally good for raids and Mythic Plus. Using Cloudburst Totem or Healing Stream Totem, it replaces each other based on a talent choice, increases the healing of your next 3 healing surges, healing waves, or Riptide spells by 20%. What do you want more when you use Cloudburst? You want to make sure that you get as much healing as you can during Cloudburst. So what happens when you press Cloudburst? You're gonna get more healing on your main abilities. So this is so great. Honestly, I just don't feel like a situation with this conduit is not going to be good. In terms of other conduits that are going to be impactful, like I mentioned, Necrolord Tumbling Waves is something that's also very interesting, because Primordial Wave has a 20% chance to not incur its cooldown. This can be so RNG, and it can provide you with so much healing if you get lucky. So I do feel some Resto Shamans are going to be like, oh man, you're only healing that much because your Primordial Wave didn't incur a cooldown 3 times in a row or something. So there is a possibility of this. It's very random. If you don't feel like you want to use this, or you feel it's too random in your case, there is a very strong case for Heavy Rainfall. Using Healing Tide Totem increases the healing of your healing rain by 75% for 20 seconds. There is a very strong case, and honestly, you might be swapping this based on a raid situation or even Mythic Plus. So keep that in mind. In terms of your endurance and finesse conduits, what I'm using right now is pretty strong. Thunderous Paws. Ghost Wolf increases your movement speed by an additional 10% for the first 3 seconds. What do you want when you use Ghost Wolf? The main reason when you use Ghost Wolf is probably you want to get out of somewhere. So this speed bonus, honestly, is going to be something that is going to be very welcome. In terms of endurance conduit, Refreshing Waters, your healing surge is 15% more effective on yourself. Something that's going to be very nice in Mythic Plus situations, because you're going to be probably using more healing surges than healing waves. And all of a sudden, maybe in raid situations, that's gonna drop some of that value. So if you don't want Refreshing Waters in like raids, you might want to pick up Vital Accretion. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Your Earth Elemental increases your maximum health by 20%. This is also very nice in raids, because your Earth Elemental is not gonna taunt the bosses. At least it can't. In Mythic Plus, you might have a tank being angry to some extent. So this is something that I'm gonna go in terms of Emny. It's also very important for me to note that if you do go with Bonesmith, there is a very cool interaction. It has recently been buffed, and all of a sudden your reveries, your intellect and armor are increased by 1% for each enchantment, and your armor up to 3%, and this is the one. Upon death, your armor anchors your soul, allowing you to fight for an additional 10 seconds. During this time, your damage and healing done is reduced by 50%, and you cannot receive healing. And there is a very interesting combo that I'm not sure if it's going to be cheesable. I'm not sure if people are going to abuse it. I'm not sure if people are gonna use it. If you combine this Soulbind with the fact that you can go with Ancestral Protection Totem, especially something like Mythic Plus scenarios, we'll have to see. If you use this, You can have a weak core that tells you like, oh hey, I actually died. For the next 10 seconds, I'm gonna die. I can do a bit of healing, a bit of damage, but I'm definitely dead, guys. And you can use your APT during that time. So all of a sudden, one of the biggest issues with APT is that sometimes you might not time it properly and it's going to be completely wasted. With this Soulbind and with this talent, you're basically gonna have a free res every 5 minutes, combined on top of the fact that Resto Shamans also have Ankh. So you can make a lot of mistakes and people might not notice. This might be cheesable, I'm not 100% sure on this yet. In terms of Venthyr Soulbinds, you'll notice that the first 2 trees you're gonna get access in the first week. The first one you get access straight away, the second one depending on your campaign quest can be obtainable within the first week. And the third Soulbind tree, General Draven, is only gonna be available I think the 7th week of Shadowlands. So you only have a choice of the 2 at the start. And you're most likely gonna go with the Mad Duke because of its throughput ability, Soothing Shade. And then once you might have been progressed a bit more and you might unlock General Draven. Last ability, Hold Your Ground, you might consider using this as well because you have to look at Draven's first ability is not all that great. So I feel it's going to be between the Mad Duke and Draven depending on which week you are in Shadowlands when watching this video. So I haven't really talked about Kirin that much because it does have certain usability issues in terms of the range of the totem itself, and I feel you can make it work, but again, I think you have the main choice between Necrolords and Venthyr, and which one should you go with? I think it's going to depend on what type of content you're doing. If you're, for example, doing really high-end mythic raiding and you feel the skill cap or high skill ceiling of Necrolord ability promoted away does not bother you, you might want to go there. If you feel like you're going to be pushing, I don't know, I'm not sure if PvP is a thing as well. If you feel like you're going to be wanting extra damage or you want simplicity, Venthyr ability Chain Harvest is something that you might want to consider. So again, guys, in terms of my personal choice, I'm probably gonna go with Necrolords for the time being because it fits what I'm trying to achieve, and I'm gonna be running, again, like I mentioned, I'm gonna be running Necrolord in Mythic Plus and Raids. I think it's going to be more than good enough with my goals in the game. I'm going to be running Primal Tide Core in Mythic Plus and Raids. That's going to be fine. I feel the HPS is going to be more than fine. My second legendary that I'm going to build is going to depend. I'm gonna choose between Chains of Devastation because I think it's really, really fun in Mythic Plus, and basically Spirit Walker's Tidal Leg Guards, depending on whether I choose to run or push really high Mythic Plus content. In terms of stats, honestly, Resto Shaman has always been a type of healer that likes crit and burst. But at the start of an expansion, I just really want to emphasize this. Item level is going to be the king. Intellect is going to be strong. You want to pick up gear that's going to be higher item level. You're gonna like your crit verse. Shamans always enjoyed crit verse in terms of stat priority. And then you're gonna have your haste mastery haste type of deal. And that's purely because crit and verse are going to give you a reliable source of HPS increase. And again, to some extent, we're talking about HPS mainly here, but reliable source. While haste and mastery again, if you look at the mastery in terms of what it does, it's very, look at it, increases healing from your spells by up to a certain percentage based on the current health of your target. So all of a sudden, if you're progressing mythic raiding, mastery could be very strong because people seen the boss for the first time and people are taking a huge amount of damage. People are dipping really low, but once people get more familiar with that and they're taking less damage, or if you're doing lower end content where people are not taking damage overall, mastery might dip. So all of a sudden it could be really strong to really bad. And that's why it's unreliable. In the same way that haste can be like that in raids, where the more haste you have, the more spells you're going to output, the more spells you're going to cast, the more mana issues you're going to have. So it might lose some efficiency. And in Mythic Plus it might be a lot different because mana is going to be less of an issue because of Prideful, and all of a sudden you might want to go with haste, especially if you want to deal more damage. And I love dealing damage as a healer, so I like to go with a bit more haste. But a lot of the times, intellect or highest item level is going to be the king. You also look at things like versatility, which reduces damage you take, which also can be a contributing factor in Mythic Plus scenarios depending on how high of a content you're dealing. Highest item level is going to be something that you're going to focus on, and people put far too much emphasis on really getting the min-maxing. In terms of Resto Shaman rotation, you'll notice that you have a certain number of spells that should be maintained as much as possible. You don't have to overthink them, you can use them because they're going to give you a good output. And one of them is going to be, as you can see here, maintaining Earth Shield. Very, very important on a target that's going to take consistent single target damage. That's probably going to be tank in many, many cases. On top of that, you'll notice that every time you're going to press Riptide or use Chain Heal, you're going to generate tidal waves. And tidal waves are going to cast time of your next healing wave is reduced by 20%, and critical effect chance of your next healing surge is increased by 40%. So you can see that with tidal waves, your healing wave and healing surge are better. So you kind of want to make sure that every time you're going to be casting healing wave or healing surge, there's tidal waves active. And again, tracking them with certain recourse is definitely recommended. And then you pretty much have things like healing rain, which you want to use on pretty much any stacked up areas, and a lot of times that might be melee. You have Riptide, which you should use as often as you can, because Riptide has been buffed so much. It is genuinely such an efficient spell right now. So using Riptide, generating tidal waves, maintaining healing rain, and then on top of that you have things like your Covenant abilities like Primordial Wave. You want to use that as well in order to proc your lead by example, and also make sure that you're setting up for a big burst AoE that again is not restricted by distance. And then again, I talked about Cloudburst before, and Cloudburst is something that can be very technically difficult to maintain or optimize. And a lot of the times when it's a new raid, when it's a new expansion, you just say use it on cooldown. And once you get to know it a bit more, you can press it again in order for it to explode earlier. You have to remember what Cloudburst does. When you activate Cloudburst, all of your healing, including overhealing, is going to store into it. And then partial amounts of that are going to be divided among allies. So what you want to do during Cloudburst, you want to optimize your healing, and that might mean having like making sure that you have no Riptides available, using Healing Rain, and then maybe Cloudburst. And then possibly this AoE situation, you're going to be using maybe something like Chain Heal. And if you're using Chain Heal and you have a proc from High Tide, that's even better. And maybe if you are running in raid situations on Unleash Life, you'll want to use Unleash Life in order to buff that. So you can see that you want to get your most effective heals during that window. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes, again, you mistime it. It takes time. It takes knowledge of the boss fight to really optimize it. So that's what I say for beginners, or actually honestly for a new raid, just use it on cooldown. Make sure that anytime you're using your Covenant ability, Cloudburst is active. Cloudburst is going to be affected by all the Covenant abilities, so it doesn't matter if you're Venthyr, Necrolord, or whatever. You want to make sure that burst of healing is going into Cloudburst. It's also worth noting that if you have Venthyr, Unleash Life is also going to affect that. So if you're Venthyr, you might want to go something like, you want to go Unleash Life, Cloudburst into Chain Harvest to get some juicy healing that's going to be stored by your Cloudburst. And then all of a sudden, if you're running Primordial Wave, you might notice a certain ways of maintaining 7 or 6 Riptides, where you can, again, you have to remember, with Primordial Wave, there's a lot of time you have where you can still be using Riptides and spreading them before you actually have to use Healing Wave. So it's not like I use Primordial Wave, I have to use Healing Wave next. That's not exactly how it works. So generally speaking, Cloudburst, time is your friend. In terms of mana and mana manageability, I think there's going to be a lot of shock for a lot of people who are coming down from Nyalotha, where you had bosses on 3 minutes or something like that. You're going into Castle Nachia, you might be doing heroic, mythic content, and some bosses take 8 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. And you really have to play into, you have to be efficient. I think in raid situations, you'll be using a lot of your Riptide Healing Wave type of deal. Healing Wave is your efficient heal, Healing Surge is your faster, but it costs a lot of more mana. So I feel the efficiency is going to be a key. I feel like you're going to have to really take it down with Chain Heal spam, because you're going to run out of mana. I know that Nyalotha, Resto Shaman was basically a Chain Heal bot until a point that they run out of mana. But guys, you're gonna have to be more efficient in raid situations. Like I mentioned, keep your Healing Rains, keep your Riptides going, keep your Unleash Life on cooldown, use it on Chain Heal, or if you can't, on other abilities. And you're gonna have a ton of cooldowns, things like Healing Tide, things like Spirit Link, things like Mana Tide Totem, and these are all gonna give you extra utility. When to use them depends. It really depends on the group situation. It really depends. Again, time is going to be your friend. At the end of the day, you have to make sure to get used to the keybinds. In terms of Mythic Plus healing is far easier than this, or at least it's less complicated. It's probably most likely going to be your Riptide into Healing Surge. Healing Surge, it's inefficient, but mana is not that big of an issue. Your Healing Surge is going to be faster, and you want your heals to be faster. If you feel like you're doing a really high tyrannical key and you're running out of mana, you might be using more healing waves. If you're running Chains of Devastation Legendary, you might be doing a lot more chain heals. So Legendaries do change this. Keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, the playstyle of Resto Shaman and Mythic Plus is going to be a lot less complicated. You might not be using a lot of healing rains, depending if you can get people to stack in it. You might not be using, chain heals that much if people are not there, and if you're not using a certain legendary. So that's all going to be changed. But in terms of how the gameplay feels from BFA to Shadowlands, is that in raids you have to be more mana efficient. In Mythic Plus, it's the same kind of story if you really think about it. And guys, let me know how you feel about this video, and I'll see you in Shadowlands.